Hello, everyone. Today, we're doing another topic that we have yet to do. I'm glad that we did it this time around, and we managed to get our hands on some fantastic stories as always. We only have 5 rather than 10, but rest assured that they're just as spooky and spine-tingling as they usually are. Again, thank you for all the love and support. It means the world to me. We're going to get somewhere with this, and it's all going to be because of you. Thank you. My heart goes out to you. To better paint the picture, here is a description of myself at the time of this incident. I'm 5'5", 26-year-old woman, medium length, bleach blonde hair, curvy, and 175 pounds, wearing black high-waisted tights and a pink crop top. 3 years ago, I was walking home late at night from my friend's house. It was dark, and at the time I lived in a rough part of a large city. I've had many sketchy situations that I've gotten myself out of. So I guess I felt sort of invincible, like nothing truly scary could happen to me. When I walk alone, I always stay very alert and aware of my surroundings for my own safety, just in case. About halfway home and roughly 10 minutes to my apartment, I noticed a van started tailing me. I was used to this since my city, it's very common for a young woman in a rough area to get propositioned for sex. It's embarrassing how desensitizing to this I was. I did my usual and crossed the road so that I would be walking beside the traffic heading in the other direction. I wasn't scared, just annoyed. The van then turned down a side street and back onto the road I was on and pulled up to me. At this point, I still wasn't scared. Again. This has happened so many times, and it never mattered if I was wearing something that showed more skin, or if I was wearing a winter coat zipped from just below my chin all the way down to my ankles. That area is notorious for that type of activity. I decided to be firm and told the person sternly, I'm not interested. I noticed there were 2 men in the van. They looked almost identical. It may have been twins or brothers. Both men had a very, very dark complexion, dark eyes, and dark short hair. The van didn't move. I was super annoyed and crossed the road again to get away. At this point, I figured this would be enough for them to stop following me. They didn't. They kept circling back every time I crossed the road. I've never had to put that much effort into getting a horny pervert to leave me alone. So, this is when I started feeling unsafe. They zipped by me at the speed the traffic was flowing in, and I yelled for them to fuck off. I thought it finally worked. It had been 3 minutes and I hadn't seen the van, so I thought I was in the clear. Just in case, I pulled my phone out and was getting ready to call my sister that I lived with. Just then, the van pulled up to me very quickly, and before I could even blink, one of the men jumped out of the van, opened the back door, and approached me quickly in an aggressive manner, as if he was about to scoop me up and throw me into the vehicle. The traffic in that area was very inconsistent. It was dead. And I imagine that this is what they were waiting for. Just as the man was about to place his hands on me, I tilted my phone and said, "You are being filmed in my live video chat. I gave my friends your license plate number and the police have been notified." I was so scared, but I didn't let that show. I stayed as calm as I could. The man paused, like he was considering if I was bluffing or telling the truth. So I tilted the phone more as if to give the fake audience a better look at him. He then jumped into the van and they sped off. I've never been the same since that night. I'm afraid of walking alone now, even in the daytime. Stay safe out there. Two creeps in a van. Let's not ever meet. I hope karma finds you both soon. So, this happened to me when I was 11 or 12 years old, over a decade ago, and I still remember it so vividly. At the time, I lived in a semi-detached house with my mom, dad, and sibling. It was decently sized, but the most impressive part was the garden, which essentially had 3 levels. The first level was concrete, the second, grass, and the third, also just grass. Had my trampoline on it, and at the very end of the garden was a tree embankment. The area I lived in was somewhat hilly. One morning, I woke up to a cracking sound, like a snapped branch, and I was worried since a week earlier a tree from the embankment had fallen onto our neighbor's garden. My bedroom was at the back end of the house overlooking the garden, so I opened the curtains to see if another tree had fallen. Instead, I saw a guy hiding in one of the trees in the garden. He was pale with blonde hair and wearing all black clothing. He was looking directly at me, presumably because he saw the curtains move. He started smirking and moved his finger in a "come here" motion. I totally freaked out and shouted for my mom and dad to come into my room. I was so scared. I physically felt like I couldn't move. This was super early in the morning, by the way, around maybe 5 a.m. So it took my dad a good 30 seconds to get into my room, at which point the stranger had hid behind the trees. I remember being really shaken up. I was crying whilst I told my dad what happened. He went out into the back garden to see if he could spot the guy, but he was just gone by that point. A bit of time passed, and I started to forget about it. Then, about 3 months after, my mom and I were watching TV together after I'd finished school. The doorbell rang, and my mom went to answer the door. I looked out the window of the living room where we were sat and saw a white van parked outside. It was the same van as my uncle's, so I walked out of the living room and into the hallway to say hi to him. When I got to the porch where my mom was stood, I realized it wasn't my uncle. It was the same guy I had seen in the garden a few months prior, and it really freaked me out. He noticed me as I walked behind my mom and gave me the same smirk as when he was in the garden. I wanted to say something to my mom, but I couldn't. I was freaking out inside. Anyway, he just asked my mom if she wanted work done on the drive. She said no, and he left. Got back into the van and just drove off. He didn't give her a business card or anything. The van didn't have any company branding, and he didn't knock on any of the neighbors' doors. I told my mom that it was the same guy as soon as he went, and she started to feel uneasy about the situation too. A month or so after that, I got my first job doing the paper round. I had to deliver over 300 papers. With my best friend at the time, it was getting towards winter, and it was dark by 4:30 p.m. We'd been doing the job together for around a month, when the one evening after school, it was super dark and rainy. We were halfway through delivering the newspapers, and a van started following us, driving really slow. At the same pace we were walking, we clocked that it was following us about a minute, and we started to panic as I noticed it was the same guy again. We left the newspaper trolley and started walking quite fast up the hill. We were about a 10-minute walk from my house. I rang my mom, who made me stay on the line while she left the house to meet us. She told us to go to the corner shop that we were about a minute away from. When we made it into the shop, the van sped off really fast. The police were called, who came to my house for a report. We told them everything. That was the last time I ever saw the creepy stranger, but I still remember what he looked like so vividly. At the time of this story, I was 21 and living in a major Midwestern city, attending the university there. Having lived there for only 1 month before my story began, I had witnessed a train stop stabbing, been yelled at by crackheads, had a homeless guy follow me and threatened to choke me out outside the physics building on campus, and watched a 13-car cop raid on a drug house just across my street. The area around the university is known for being rough and had a notoriously high rate of crime. We would get a few texts a week from the campus police saying things like there had been a robbery, a break-in, an assault, stalkings, attempted kidnappings, etc. I always ignored these texts, thinking foolishly that I would never be a victim because I was smart enough to stay out of trouble, not go out alone late at night, all the cliches. I seriously regret this behavior now. And to anyone listening to this, please, never think that you're 100% safe. No matter your level of preparedness, always do your best to stay observant and careful. The first incident wasn't too unusual. I was just a block or two away from my apartment building one day early in the evening, and it was still light outside. I was walking my dog, Sesame, a cute Shiba Inu, who just looks like a fluffy, goofy puppy and has never been frightening or particularly protective in his life. As I was heading back home, I passed a small parking lot, and in it, a large van. I could see a man in his early 60s, sitting in the driver's seat smoking a cigarette. He was staring at me. As I passed, he actually leaned out of his car and called out to me, "Hey, you there? That's a cute dog. What's his name?" I should mention, this isn't even my first story like this. I have a pretty intense fear of strangers and actually struggle with PTSD from other incidents in my life. Being pretty wary for this reason, I ignored him and just walked faster. I heard a car door shut behind me and turned quickly to see that he had gotten out of his van and was slowly walking towards me. He called out to me again, "Hey, I just want to see your dog. Come back." His phrasing pissed me off, and I gripped my dog's leash and started to speed walk away from him, starting to feel nervous. My heart was beginning to pound, but I kept telling myself over and over that I was overreacting, and it was just my paranoia acting up, and there was nothing to worry about. Boy, was I wrong. I managed to turn the corner and was about to cross the final park before getting to my apartment. In my fear over the van guy, I wasn't paying attention as much as I was, and I usually do, to what was in front of me. I looked back over my shoulder, and the guy had stopped following me. He was, however, standing in the middle of the sidewalk with a huge, creepy grin on his face. I whirled back around with my eyes glued to my building. I only needed to walk another half a block and I'd be home. I was going to get away from him and his creepy van. Just when I had thought I was safe, a group of 5 or 6 men came from the side of the park I wasn't watching. They were all tall and intimidating stature, and all of them were laughing and looking right at me. Out of the corner of my eye, the van guy had started walking towards me as well. I remember he was whistling. I again picked up my pace and desperately searched for my keys in my pocket as I hurried to the door. The group of men then veered towards me, partially cutting me off, and in all my stupid politeness I stopped. They grinned at me with sick, perverted smiles, obviously checking me out. Looking up and down my body made me sick. I tried not to panic and inched closer to my apartment. They all barraged me with questions one after another. I tried to refuse them, stammering, and as I saw the van guy come and join their group, leering at me, while I inched away, they inched closer. One of them then reached out for me. His fingers actually touched my arm. I leapt back, trying not to start crying, but Sesame suddenly lunged at them, his teeth bared, a horrifying snarl ripping from his throat. Every bit of cute Chiba personality was gone, and he looked like he was wanting to tear one of these guys' throats out. It startled them enough that I was able to turn and sprint the final distance to my building, locking the door behind me. I fell to the floor inside my building, hugging Sesame. However, the entire front of my building was glass, and to my horror and disbelief, the group of men came and stood in front of the windows, grinning at me, laughing, and making kissy faces and lewd gestures at me. The apartment manager came out and called the cops on them, but they all ran away. I made it back home and scrubbed myself in the shower, crying and shaking with fear. Sesame got a special dinner that evening, and I kept telling myself that they just wanted to mess with me, and I was never in any real danger. Stupid of me, I know. About a month later, when I had finally managed to be able to walk outside my apartment without severe anxiety, I was actually planning on moving a bit farther away from the campus. It was still going to be in a sketchy neighborhood, but the thought of those men knowing where I lived kept me up at night. My apartment actually hired a security guard to be there 24/7 after someone had broken into the building, smashed all the windows, destroyed some of the furniture, and stole a bunch of bikes. Of course, my bike got stolen. Anyway, I was heading home from class, and it was a beautiful day. I actually felt pretty happy for once, and popped my earbuds in on the last few blocks before I got home. Stupid, I know. After a block or so, I started to feel like someone was watching me. My palms started sweating. I glanced behind me, trying not to look obvious, and a tall man was about 20 feet behind me, staring straight at me. I snapped my head back around and ripped out my earbuds. It can't be. I was just jumping to conclusions given my anxiety disorder and paranoia, surely. But there was something familiar about him. My heart started racing as I hoped to God the others weren't waiting for me around the corner of my building, ready to jump me. I walked faster, wishing Sesame was with me. I was too afraid to look back at him as I fumbled with my keys and wrenched the door open as hard as I could. This turned out to be a crucial mistake. As I ran to the elevator, trying to breathe a sigh of relief, I saw with absolute horror that the man had caught the door I had thrown wide open and was slowly coming into the building with me. He paused, standing away from me, but close enough that I could hear his ragged breathing and smell alcohol coming off of him. My heart was thudding in and out of my chest, and I struggled to think clearly. The apartment manager was already home for the day, and I was completely alone in the lobby. There were no other doors out of that room, and the stranger was blocking my way to the door. The security guard was supposed to be keeping an eye on the building, but he was nowhere to be seen. The elevator came, and I tried to run into it and slam my hand over the door close button as fast as I could. I pushed my floor button and huddled in the far corner of the elevator. I started to, once again, try to catch my breath, but right when the door was almost closed, he stuck his hand in. I couldn't believe it. He waited until the door was just about to close, and then he just stopped it. He was standing close enough that there was no way that it was a mistake. My stomach dropped, and a suffocating sense of dread crept in. I kept my head down as he joined me. My desperate hope that he was just a dirty, drunken resident of the building was dashed when he didn't press any buttons. I didn't know why I didn't run. I didn't know why I didn't run out of the elevator or try to leave the building again. I was paralyzed with fear, and all I could do was watch as the door closed and sealed my fate. The elevator was filled with the stench of alcohol and body odor. If I wasn't so terrified, I may have gagged. It was nauseating. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't move. I tried to scream at myself in my head to press the wrong button and try to escape him, but I was completely petrified. He leaned closer to me, and as I heard him breathe in deeply and very quietly sigh, like he was content, I felt tears well in my eyes, and the seconds it took to reach the top floor where I lived felt like hours. I saw no way I could escape this sick, drunk guy who was smelling and smiling at me. In the reflection of the elevator walls, I could make out his disgusting smile. He was staring directly at me, his hands in his pockets, clearly holding on to something. I'm not religious, but I prayed that I would make it to my door in time. I realized he probably wasn't going to attack me in the elevator. There was a large camera in the ceiling. I looked up at it, feeling a tear spill out of my eye as I did so, hoping that whoever saw the tape eventually would identify this man. The worst part of it all is that I've been trained in martial arts and self-defense since I was about 8 years old, and I thought of myself as stronger and braver than I was acting. I should know what to do. I should be strong enough to do it. But no matter how many times I had disarmed, thrown, or choked out attackers in the studio, nothing totally prepares you for the dread of a real-life situation. As the elevator reached my floor, I managed to snap out of the stupor long enough to dash through the door and run to my apartment unit. I nearly missed a keyhole, but I threw open my door. I was nearly through when my backpack snagged on the outside of the handle of the door, trapping me. I heard the man walking quickly to my door, a low chuckle building in his throat as he watched me panic and struggle to get free. I felt like a mouse being watched by a cat, trapped and helpless, so close to escaping. I finally gave up and shoved my arms through the straps, abandoning my backpack. As I did so, the man suddenly reached out for me. I was able to slam the door shut, deadbolting it. The gust of air from the door slamming brought his disgusting smell in with me, and in my terror and disgust, I retched violently. I looked through the peephole. He was staring right at me. pressing his forehead against the door, his mouth bent in a furious scowl. He swore at me and ripped my backpack off the handle of the door, slamming it to the ground. I winced as I heard my laptop thud. I was still too terrified to say anything, but I grabbed the knife I kept by my door in my hand, ready if he tried anything. After a few minutes of staring at my door, jiggling the handle, licking the peephole, and making obscene motions at it, he unzipped my backpack, dumping its contents onto the floor. He picked up my bag, sniffing it and leering at the peephole as he did so, like he knew I was watching him. I couldn't look away. Again, paralyzed in fear. Finally, he left, using the elevator visible from my door like nothing had happened. I continued to stare out of the peephole for what felt like an eternity, and then, finally, the apartment manager, feeling my anger sinking in that the security guard hadn't been anywhere in sight, not paying attention. It turns out he had fallen asleep eating Taco Bell and watching movies on his phone. He was only 10 feet away from the elevator the entire time, sleeping in the office behind the closed door. They fired him, but the creepy guy was never caught, and neither were any of the others. I don't even know for sure if this man was a part of the original group. I was honestly too terrified to look much at their faces during the first incident. I moved out of my apartment a week later, staying with my boyfriend at the time for the remainder of my lease, and keeping Sesame with me at all times when possible. A few more things happened while I lived in that city, from having to call in a gunfight from outside my new apartment window, to having to pick up my friend who was being followed by a van, to having to evacuate during an arson incident. There are nice things about that city too, but during my time there, besides learning the police department was absolutely useless and corrupt, to nearly escaping with my life multiple times, I couldn't be happier to be far, far away from there, and doing a lot better with my fear and anxiety. This happened some years ago. I was 20, I think. I was going on a road trip of a sort with a really good friend of mine and his family. Our destination was a concert in a country next to ours, but we would be stopping at night to sleep in the camper we drove in. We hadn't crossed the border yet, so when we stopped at the first campsite for the night, now it seemed like a pretty family-friendly and safe place, so none of us had our guards up or anything. That night, at about 11 p.m. or somewhere, while my friend and his family were getting ready for bed, I went outside to get some fresh air. Our camper was almost completely next to the beach, so I went down to the shore to dip my feet and get some much needed quiet time for myself. On the way there, I passed a beach shack, a detail that will be important for later. As I stood there, letting the waves lap over my feet, I noticed the silhouette of a man further down the beach, but it was a public space for campers, so I didn't think much of it. After being absorbed by splashing in the water with my feet and enjoying the moonlight, I decided to make my way back. Of course, it was very dark given the late hour, but I don't scare easily. Now, as a woman in the modern world, I usually do stay on my guard after dark, but that thought never occurred to me since I felt I was in a safe environment so close to the campsite. Anyway, as I was walking back, I noticed that the silhouette of this man further down the beach was gone. But even more worrying was the fact that as I was nearing the beach shack, I saw that someone seemed to be trying to hide from my view behind it. Immediately, I was on alert and called a friend I knew would be awake. I gave the shack a wide berth while talking loudly to my friend about how she was coming to meet me. After not too long, I got safely back to the campsite and hopped in bed in the caravan. I didn't tell my friend or his family because even though I was scared, there could have been many logical, non-threatening answers to what I saw. I put it out of my mind, and the rest of the trip went off without a hitch. About a year or so later, I was talking to my friend about the trip and suddenly remembered the creepy experience. As I told him, he slowly got pale, though, and told me something his brother had told him and his family over breakfast some months after the trip. That same night after I had gotten back and gone to bed, his brother had gotten up late at night to get some water, but when he passed the window right by his bed, he saw a man standing right there outside looking in the window. As soon as he was seen, the man left, but it definitely creeped out the brother a lot. But just like me, he seemed to put it out of his mind. Now, with both of those stories, it doesn't seem far-fetched that the man hiding by the beach shack had followed me back. I really am scared to think about what would have happened if I had gone alone. My fiance and I are soon to be married and are remodeling an old family home. We started working on the house about 2 or 3 months ago. My fiance bought a bunch of tools to use on the house to renovate. The house has been sitting with nobody in it for over a year. Keep in mind, the house is located in a fairly rural area. A few houses and trailers here and there, but not too much traffic. We have a rodent problem, and I've been setting up traps to catch them. 3 weeks ago, my fiance went to check the traps, and we had a rat that was live. Long story short, he didn't want to take care of it, so he left. I got off work at 9 p.m. and went over to the house to take care of the rat. It was raining, and my mom and brother came with me. I went to the back door, and it was wide open, and water was blowing into the house. I was pissed. I thought my fiance had left the door open. I shut it and finished my business there. I asked my fiance why he left the door open, and he claimed he didn't. I called bullshit and left it at that. Didn't occur to me that somebody had possibly made a quick getaway. Fast forward to today. My fiance and I went to our house to throw a whole bunch of trash and stuff into the dumpster we rented. When we went inside, we immediately noticed that some things were missing. Drills, sanders, etc. We realized that they had been stolen. We call my MIL and tell her about it. She says to make a police report. What scares me so much about this is that everything began to click with the rat trap incident. Somebody has been scoping us out. I would go to our house by myself on many occasions and always had the creeps and felt watched. My little brother even remarked that he felt watched there and asked if we were sure somebody was in there while we were gone. I noticed today when I was there alone that my dog was acting very nervous and suspicious. She wasn't running and playing like she usually does, and didn't want me to go to the backyard or wooded area. I'm glad I trusted her and my gut feeling. I don't know if the thieves were there, but I'm glad I didn't find out. We were currently in the process of installing cameras. This had to have been somebody that lives near us and can monitor how often we are there. So to that person or people that broke into my unfinished house, let's not ever meet. Thank you everyone for listening. If your story was told, I'm glad I'm the one who could tell it. I appreciate all the love and support. I hope you enjoy today's stories as much as I did reading them.